When the Pope, pressured by the evil French king, decided to outlaw and sentence the Knights Templar based on unfounded accusations of witchcraft and heresy, a brave and pious king in Portugal rose to the call and offered them refuge and salvation. Romanticization aside, this is a video about how, thanks to this king, the Templar Knights survived in Portugal. But first, some context. After the success of the First Crusade, the Templars became the cool kids of Christendom. Not just for the military success, but also for the economic success they were seeing in their agricultural and trade operations. During this time, having the Templars on your side was a shit code for success if your game was stealing Muslim land. A sacred band of brothers, raiding and conquering lands from the infidels in the Holy Land. Why would they find themselves in Portugal? Well, welcome to 12th century Iberia. Half of it is Christian, half is Muslim. The Christian half fought the Muslim half, but we also see insane levels of infighting. It's a free-for-all in Iberia. Perfect place for a crusade. Oh wait, there's one already happening! Hey, have you heard about the guys who did a crusade and conquered Jerusalem? What if we ask for their help in our Reconquista? When the Templars were touring Iberia in search of donations for the effort in the Holy Land, the Count of Portugal, D. Afonso Henriques, solicited their help in his crusade against the Almoravids down south. A deal was made. The Templars would aid the Christian effort, and in return they would be awarded farmland, villages and fortresses in Portuguese territory. In 1128 they were granted the Castle of Soud, marking the first official settlement of the order in Portugal. From 1128 to 1144, we have no mention of Templar military participation in Portuguese battles, only sources that detail the donations they were being granted. But from 1144 onwards, oh, it's open season, defenseless Muslim civilians beware. On the year 1139, Count D. Afonso Henriques won the Battle of Ourique so hard that his troops titled him King of Portugal. Guess who was immensely rewarded for aiding him? The Templars. They got castle after castle as the Portuguese offensive saw victory after victory in the south. The relationship between King D. Afonso and the Templars became so close that the king made a declaration of brotherhood to the order and, in return, the order granted him privileges usually reserved for brothers, like being allowed to be buried in a Templar robe and have his name recorded in the order's book of prayers. This was a win-win scenario. The new king had a base of support from a specialized military order, and the order had privileges granted and reaffirmed time after time, with new patrimony being handed over with each successful offensive. A symbiotic relationship was developing between the Order of the Temple and the Crown of Portugal. Over time, the Portuguese branch of the Templars forgot their original mission regarding the Holy Land in favor of a new mission in the Reconquista of Iberia and grew inseparable from the Portuguese crown. For centuries, they collaborated with Portuguese levies and armies. For centuries, they aided the Portuguese crown and its designs. For centuries, they held the southern border, and during those centuries, they themselves became Portuguese. If the Templars, during their mission in the Iberian Reconquista, became so profoundly tied to the Portuguese crown, people, and army, then what happened in Portugal when in 1312, pressured by King Philippe IV of France, Pope Clement V ends the Order of the Temple of Solomon? The king who would live through the downfall of the Templars was Diniz. He's one of the goats of the Portuguese monarchy. He was by all accounts a brilliant strategist, diplomat and poet. Recently, his mortal remains were examined and a recreation of his face was created. Ew, what the fuck? When he came into power, Diniz had a very favorable view of the Order of the Temple. He granted them the protection of the crown in 1279, and he reaffirmed their rights and privileges in 1285. But with each passing year, it became apparent that the Templars were declining. Their existence came into question in 1307 when King Philippe IV of France leveraged accusations of heresy and witchcraft against the Templars. The reasons for this falling out are too complex for diving into in this video, but let's just say that King Philippe had some scores to settle. Pope Clement V initially argued that these accusations were unfounded and without evidence, but he would eventually pass the papal bull Vox in Excelso, declaring the Order of the Temple of Solomon officially extinct. The reason being that the order's reputation had been tainted beyond repair. If we shift the focus back to Portugal, during those early years of the 14th century, Diniz was able to recognize the obvious. The Templars were gonna be dismantled and all the patrimony they held in Portugal would come into question. He then starts seizing up some of these fortresses under crown authority. This action should not be viewed as a power grab in spite of the Templars. Historian José Valente argues that Diniz seized those fortresses and territories to prevent them from being granted by papal decree to foreign military orders who were outside of his control. He was particularly against the idea of those fortresses falling under Hospitaller control, whom he considered outsiders to the realm. From 1307 to 1312, the trial of the Templars takes place. It was an event during which most Templars in Europe were persecuted, trialed, and executed. This was more apparent and violent in France, but the curious thing is that these trials never reached Iberia. Specifically in Portugal, the Templars never suffered the damage to their reputation that we see in other European kingdoms. Diniz was sitting on a ton of Templar castles. He knew they were gonna be dismantled, and he knew that he still needed the order to protect the border. He reaches the conclusion that another order had to take the Templars' place. Negotiations start to take place on two fronts, one with the Pope, another between the Iberian kings. When it came to Iberia, the kings of the best peninsula, Iberia number 1, gathered and formed the pact. This pact had one main objective: to prevent the Pope ruling that Iberian patrimony of the Templars was to be given to the Hospitallers. The Iberian kings did not want this, so they banded together and managed to make the Pope compromise. When the negotiations were all set and done, the patrimony of the Templars in Iberia was left intact. The kings were given an exception that allowed them to directly negotiate with the Pope the inheritance of this patrimony. When it came time for Diniz to negotiate with the Pope, he rolled a 20 diplomatic check. His argumentation was based on one main point: that an alternative to the Templars was needed for the security of the kingdom, as the Muslim threat remained present in the southern territories. These negotiations between Pope and Diniz lasted from 1312 to 1319. The Pope died, and so his successor, Pope John XXII, would be the one to finalize the negotiation process. On the 14th of March 1319, after years of mixing and mastering, Pope John XXII drops the bull Ad Ea Ex Quibus. What this bull establishes is that a new holy military order was to be created in Portugal. This order would inherit both the fortresses that were being negotiated, but also the fortresses Diniz had swiped. And so a new order is established. This order was to be called Ordo Militae Jesu Christi, the Military Order of Jesus Christ, commonly known in Portugal as Ordem de Cristo. The Pope was clear on his terms. Although the Grand Master of the Order of Christ had to pledge his fealty to the king, this did not make the order a vassal to the crown, and beyond this, it was established that the Portuguese crown had no rights over the patrimony of the Order of Christ. On the 24th of June 1319, Diniz issued a royal diploma, where not only does he confer to the Order of Christ the fortresses he had appropriated, but also apologizes for doing so. He explains that it was unfair of him to do so, and by giving the fortresses back, he hoped to clean his conscience of past mistakes. This is cool, sure, but the main thing, the insane, unbelievable thing regarding this document, is that the king himself, for the first time, acknowledges the Order of Christ as a reformation of the Order of the Temple. It is the first time in the historical record where we see the recognition of the Order of Christ as a direct sequel to the Templars. The inauguration ceremony for the Order of Christ took place in November 1319. The order was to be established in Algarve, in the castle of Castro Marim. Gil Martins, former Templar, was chosen to be the order's first Grandmaster. All cool and dandy, except a couple days later, Gil Martins granted the crown the rights over all the revenues pertaining to the order's patrimony in perpetuity. Hey, the Pope only spoke of directly inheriting them, he never said anything about the incomes. So far, everything about the new order sounds eerily similar to the Templars. Their duties, their rights, privileges, and even location, it's virtually the same thing with a different name. The similarities do not stop here, because the Order of Christ directly got most of the members of the former Order of the Templars, at least according to Rui de Pina, a royal chronist who wrote a century after these events took place, which means his testimony has to be taken with a grain of salt. In his Chronicle of King Diniz, he writes that during the trial of the Templars, there were no indications that Templars had been persecuted or executed in Portugal. Quite the contrary, many of these Templar brothers would eventually become members of the Order of Christ. And there are other points of continuity. For example, Dom Vasco Fernandes, the last master of the Portuguese branch of the Templars, became a commander of the Order of Christ, and until his death, his signature was always accompanied by Quandam Miles Templi, at one time a Knight of the Temple. This is also further evidence of the inexistence of Templar persecution in Portugal. And if for some reason you need any further proof, look what I got here in Portugal. Yep, that's right, me boy, the Holy Grail. If you like and subscribe, I might even let you take a peek inside. You did it? Nice, look here.